Somewhere in the world right now, there are several hundred ships that cannot move. They're sitting at anchor in the Gulf of Oman, loaded with oil. Their crews are watching the news on satellite feeds, listening to radio messages from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. The cargo is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and none of it is going anywhere. It's all because of this. 21 miles long gap of water between Iran and Oman. That's roughly the distance between Manhattan and the Hamptons. And through this gap, 20 million barrels of oil passes every day. Under normal circumstances, that is. Let me put it this way. 1/5 of all the oil in the world, 1/5 of everything the entire world uses, every plane, every car, every factory, every hospital generator, 1/5 of it all has to pass through this narrow gap. And about 2 weeks ago, Iran closed it off. Let's start with the basics. The Persian Gulf is not an open ocean. It's a pocket, a cul-de-sac of water, roughly the size of California, bordered by some of the most oil-rich nations on the earth. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. All of them pump oil. All of them need to sell it. And all of them have exactly one way out: the Strait of Hormuz. The strait runs about 100 miles long, and at its narrowest, it squeezes down to just 21 miles across. But here's the kicker. The actual shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide in each direction. 2 miles, that's it. Almost 20 million barrels of oil per day. Almost 20% of global LNG exports. Almost 30% of Europe's jet fuel supply. Almost 1/3 of the world's fertilizer trade. All of it through those 2 miles. Now let's look at those who sit on the northern shore of the strait. Iran, specifically Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which has military installations, missile batteries, drone launch sites, and fast attack boat fleets positioned directly overlooking the shipping lanes. Since the 1970s, they've also controlled a chain of islands right in the middle of the strait, including the Greater Tumb, Lesser Tumb, and Abu Musa. From those islands, an IRGC commander can see every tanker that passes. Iran didn't stumble into this geographic advantage. They built a military doctrine around it for decades, quietly, patiently, and the world kept buying the oil anyway because the alternative was unthinkable until now. Here's something important to understand. Iran threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz is not entirely new. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, Iran issued similar threats. Again in 2011, 2012, and then in 2019, when the US imposed sanctions on Iran, they adopted similar position. And while oil prices saw minor spikes, around 2%, the waterway practically remained functional. So it was more of a paper threat. Why? The strait isn't just the world's oil pipeline, it's Iran's oil pipeline as well. Nearly all of Iran's own oil exports pass through Hormuz. Closing it would strangle Iran's own economy. But then came February 28, 2026. Within hours of American and Israeli strikes on Iran, IRGC commanders were on VHF radio broadcasting a single message to every vessel near the strait. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. That's it. The threat was not new, but this time, Iran actually meant it. And they had a new weapon that nobody had fully accounted for. The most interesting thing about closing the Strait of Hormuz that nobody ever realized is that you don't need a navy for it. Iran's conventional naval forces are, by any honest assessment, significantly weaker than the US Fifth Fleet. The Americans have 2 carrier strike groups in the region. Iran doesn't even have anything remotely comparable. But Iran is not fighting a straight-up naval battle. It's fighting an insurance war. Here's how it works. Iran launched drone strikes, cheap, small drones, against a handful of vessels in the vicinity of the strait. Not enough to sink the global fleet, but enough to make the Lloyd's of London insurance market sit up and take notice. Lloyd's of London is the heart of maritime insurance around the world, providing affordable insurance premiums for oil carrying cargo in the sea. In the days before the conflict, the insurance premiums for ships transiting the strait had already tripled because of the risk of war. After the attacks began, insurers began withdrawing insurance coverage almost entirely. By March 5th, P&I insurance was simply unavailable for the strait. No coverage, no voyage. Without insurance, shipping companies can't secure financing. They can't hire crews, can't dock at the other end. Ships don't move at all. Full stop. All Iran had to do was several drone strikes in the vicinity, and all of a sudden insurers and shipping companies decided it was unsafe to traverse the very narrow S-curve of that waterway. That quote is from the global head of commodity strategy at the RBC Capital Markets. And she's right. Iran achieved, through very cheap drones and fear, what decades of threats and $1 billion military couldn't. Ocean traffic dropped 70% within 48 hours of the strikes. By March 2nd, no tankers in the strait were broadcasting identification signals at all. Over 150 ships were sitting at anchor in the Gulf of Oman, waiting. The strait, for all practical purposes, was closed. And now for the part that hits closest to home, wherever home may be. About 80% of the oil and gas moving through the strait goes east, towards Asia. And when you understand that, the geopolitical stakes snap into focus very quickly. Japan gets roughly 95% of its crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. About 70% of that oil comes through the Hormuz. India imports more than half of its LNG from Gulf sources, and about 60% of its total oil comes from the Middle East. India faces, as one energy analyst put it, a dual physical and financial shock. Oil prices spiking, at the same time its supply physically diminishes. Pakistan and Bangladesh have almost no energy storage flexibility. Their LNG supply is over 70% Gulf dependent. South Korea, similar story. Global oil prices went up by 35% in a single week, biggest weekly gain since 1983. Iraq was forced to cut 1.5 million barrels per day because it was running out of storage space. Kuwait cut production because the tankers can't reach its ports. In Qatar, LNG production halted after Iranian drone strikes hit its facilities. Here's the dark irony that energy economists are staring at. The US is no longer dependent on Middle Eastern oil. But that doesn't matter because oil is a global commodity priced on global supply. When Hormuz closes, American consumers pay more at the pump anyway. There's no such thing as energy independence when the global market is integrated. And one more detail that perfectly captures the absurdity of the situation. While commercial shipping was frozen, Iran was still sending its own oil through the strait to China. Around 12 million barrels in the first 2 weeks of the war, according to satellite tracking firm Tanker Trackers. Iranian flagged and Chinese flagged vessels moving through the same corridor that the IRGC said would be set ablaze. So the strait isn't really closed, it's selectively closed. Iran controls who passes and who doesn't. And that is, in many ways, much more frightening than a full blockade. So what can anyone actually do about it? The United States has options. The US Navy has the firepower to destroy Iranian naval assets and physically escort tankers through the strait. President Trump said on March 3rd that the Navy may do exactly that. His energy secretary posted on social media that it had happened, but then the White House press secretary publicly corrected it had not happened. Because even for the most powerful navy in the world, clearing and holding a 2-mile wide corridor is genuinely hard without escalating the conflict into something much larger. And the shipping companies know it. There are other partial alternatives as well. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline called the East-West Pipeline that can bypass the strait entirely, but it has a total capacity of 7 million barrels per day. And as of 11th March, it has been ramped up to its full emergency capacity. The UAE has a pipeline to Fujairah. It can handle less than 2 million barrels a day. Combined, these two have a total of less than 9 million barrels, while the Strait of Hormuz normally carries 20 million. For 50 years, every geopolitical analyst identified the Strait of Hormuz as the single most important choke point in the global energy system. The US Fifth Fleet exists to a great extent because of the Strait of Hormuz. Governments around the world built emergency stockpiles because of it. And yet, when the moment came, it wasn't a fleet of warships that closed it. It wasn't a minefield. It wasn't a ballistic missile. It was a cheap drone the size of a motorcycle, and an insurance market that crumbled. The most powerful economic weapon in the world turns out to be fear.